If you look to the many blockbusters that have been released in the last few years, multiple trends can be seen, some cheap and some worthwhile. But throughout all of that, one thing has been consistent. Welcome to Sandwich Reviews. I'm the Talking Sentient Sandwich, and if Hollywood keeps on making $300 million movies and expecting each and every one to be the biggest movie ever, it will implode on itself. And yet, before I get into any of that, I should preface by saying that while movie studios and studio heads are easy to blame, and don't get me wrong, they have a large role in it, they aren't the sole reason why blockbusters have been bombing. They have a lot of power and create the output, but it's the audience that guides where the next trend in filmmaking will go. And in this video, I want to highlight the 3 reasons why Hollywood needs to change and why most moviegoers have decided to forego going to the movies. Starting with reason number 1. Audiences don't want to go to the theater. Though I can't deny how great it is to see some films on the big screen, mainly because of the booming sound quality, but in this day and age, even that as well as a massive widescreen can be put in your own home. With smaller percentages of people going to the movies, the question has to be asked, have moviegoers had enough? And along with that, is streaming taking over? To answer the first, maybe, and the second, nah, not anytime soon. The same experience can be fabricated in your own living room, but every once in a while something comes along and proves that going to the theater and watching it in a packed room can be nothing more than a core memory. Recently, we had Barbie, Oppenheimer, and Dune 2, and before then was Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. There will always be a film that proves why you should go to the theater to watch it. I mean, every Christopher Nolan movie's soundtrack demonstrates that perfectly, as does A Quiet Place's editing. Even the ending of Rogue One was made infinitely better because I watched it not only with my friends who are Star Wars fans, but with a theater full of massive Star Wars fans. Everyone practically leapt from their seats the moment Darth Vader ignited his lightsaber and started wrecking shop. And CG Princess Leia may have been distracting, but I can't deny I was still hyped. And immediately after watching Rogue One, my friends and I all went back to one of our places and watched A New Hope. You know how I mentioned getting core memories from going to the theater before? Well, Rogue One isn't a great film. I mean, it did birth Andor, so there's that. But I will remember the theater experience of watching it until the day I die. And for that alone, I'll defend spending the money to go to the theater. Earlier, I also mentioned how audiences can guide where the next trend for movies will go. And that's because whatever kind of movie that people are going to go out and spend money on is the kind of movie that will be made next. Whatever that may be. Most of the time, Hollywood does take the wrong message, usually deciding to see their output as content rather than the art that it is. But that doesn't take away from the power that you as a viewer have. And yet, if a giant summer blockbuster comes to theaters, but it is promised to be released on streaming sometimes within the month it's put in theaters, what's the point of using that power when you can just stay at home and watch it on your couch? And that's without even mentioning the day and date releases that Warner Brothers had in 2021. I mean, I waited to watch Dune Part 1 in theaters because I had a feeling it would be better in that environment, but I could have watched it a day before in my own home. And while that studio has seemingly learned the lesson, it ended up with so many amazing movies bombing. Movies like James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, which deserved so much better. But that brings me to reason number 2. Studios expect these movies to make their money back opening weekend. Nothing is ever going to make its money back in a weekend, and those that do are rare exceptions. And when 99% of films inevitably fail to do that, the studios pull the plug and consider it a failure, ignoring obvious signs just to keep it in theaters. The Greatest Showman, and recently Anyone But You, were able to do incredibly well simply because they were just left in theaters for a long time, allowing them to keep raking it in. I'm sure there is a cost to putting and keeping something in theaters, but that small percentage is a price that movie studios should be more than willing to pay. I mean, so long as the film is well made. Of course, the biggest finger to point to with that is immediate streaming releases. Because for at least a little while, the theater should be the only option to watch a new release. I remember wanting to watch The Force Awakens again after watching it at the theater, but I waited too long, and by the time I got off my lazy butt to go, it was gone. And because it wasn't in theaters anymore, I had to wait months for it to come out on DVD. And in that time, I got even more excited to rewatch it, because that's what waiting for a release of something does. Nowadays, Hollywood studios, Disney especially, is very guilty of dropping their new movies on streaming services and then proceed to question why that movie didn't make any money. And on the off chance they do put something in theaters, you can always expect it'll be available to watch at home while it's being shown on the big screen. And it should be obvious, but if a movie is good and word of mouth spreads, getting more people to watch it over time, that's how it becomes a success. Unless there's a built-in franchise or a well-known filmmaker behind the camera, a movie has to be phenomenal to capture the public's consciousness. And even then, it's not a guarantee. With big franchise blockbusters, you can see that most, if not all, are multi-$100 million endeavors. And that leads to the final reason why Hollywood will implode if it continues as it is, which is reason number 3. Studios are spending too much money making these movies. I may have spoiled it in the very beginning, but you would have guessed it anyway. Because like I just mentioned, 99% of massive superhero or action movies cost the studio an insane amount. And that's the big price tag that forces a studio to reassess their profits and start panicking if a film doesn't break even in its opening weekend. Even a fun animated Disney movie like Coco, which I do love, cost $225 million to make, and that's just the budget for the film alone, without factoring in anything else. I can't deny how beautiful that movie looks, but there is no reason for it to cost that much. And if a movie makes its budget back, one would assume that it broke even, but no, there's still advertisements and marketing to factor in as well. So when you consider that and more, a film typically needs to make at least double, sometimes triple its actual budget to break even. Obviously, that's not the case for smaller studios, but when it comes to big tentpole blockbusters, the marketing budget can get even larger than that. Of course, when you look at billion-dollar films like Avengers Endgame and Avatar 2, it's easy to justify the cost. But not every movie can or should aim to be like that. Even superhero or action movies, which do tend to cost more than others, shouldn't all be that big. I mean, without the smaller stakes, ground level stories, how can anyone even appreciate the bigger ones? Those billion-dollar movies were able to make that much because they were either finales to an interconnected saga or had years of build-up to generate hype. And when something like Barbie or Oppenheimer comes along and makes a buttload of cash, it's only because the names behind the film bring people in. That, or it's become so much of a cultural event, people just have to go and see it. So to reiterate, why aren't people going to the movies? It's because the industry has set their audience up to believe that they don't have to. Personally, I would much rather just sit on the couch and watch every new release in the comfort of my own home, but I often go to the movie if I want to support a certain studio or filmmaker, because just like I discussed before, that's the power we have. However, even if every single person were to decide that the theater experience was in fact worth it, it would still require all of these studios to completely restructure how they release a movie. And there's no overnight solution that can fix that. It would take dozens of years of effort from everyone to solve the 3 reasons I examined. But that's exactly why that process needs to be started right now. If you agree, let me know down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for weekly video essays and reviews, and enjoy a delicious sandwich.